The rain in Nova Roma was a perpetual slate-gray drizzle, clinging to the basalt avenues and slicking the polished marble facades. It wasn't unpleasant, it was just constant. A damp reminder of the empire's enduring grip on this corner of Europe. A constant wash of water against the centuries of accumulated stone and steel. I, Lucius Valerius, archivist of the Legio Scientiae, the Legion of Knowledge, traced another finger across the intricate mosaic depicting Caesar Augustus addressing the Senate, a scene rendered with unsettling clarity by the automated artisans of the Workshop of Reflections. It was 2147 I ab urb Aetna, since the founding, and the world looked remarkably like it had done for the last 1500 years. The crucial difference wasn't the technology, though that existed in a vastly more sophisticated form than even the most optimistic historians of our time could have predicted. It was Rome. The empire hadn't fallen, not in the way history recorded. There were civil wars, certainly, power struggles, regional rebellions. They happened with a grim regularity, like seasonal tides. But the core structure remained: a layered bureaucracy, a professional army, and an unwavering belief in Pax Romana that had somehow, improbably, held. The story of the fall was a carefully curated myth, propagated by the scholarly guilds to justify their dominance and maintain social order. The narrative of barbarian invasions, of decadent emperors, of crumbling infrastructure, it was all meticulously constructed after 1500 I, an attempt to understand and ultimately control the forces that had almost shattered everything. But the reality was far more nuanced, far less dramatic. It began with Diocletian's reforms in the late 3rd century. Instead of collapsing under the weight of its own vastness, the empire had fractured into eastern and western halves, each governed by an emperor, a system designed to improve efficiency and responsiveness. The division wasn't absolute. There was constant negotiation, strategic alliances, and yes, occasional skirmishes. But it allowed Rome to adapt, to consolidate its power in the east, primarily Egypt and Anatolia, while the west, weakened but resilient, focused on maintaining control over Gaul, Hispania, Britannia, and North Africa. The key was innovation. The Dark Ages hadn't occurred. Instead of a decline in learning, Roman engineering, architecture, and administration thrived under the patronage of wealthy merchant families who had emerged to fill the vacuum left by collapsing provincial governments. The Roman legal system, refined over centuries, became the foundation for international trade agreements, the Consociata Asterisk, as they were known, which governed commerce across a vast swathe of Europe and North Africa. These weren't haphazard treaties. They were meticulously drafted, enforced by legions stationed throughout the territories, and based on principles of Roman law, interpreted by learned jurists trained in the academies. The rise of Christianity had been complicated. Initially persecuted, it gained traction as a tolerated philosophical movement among the educated elite, eventually becoming the state religion under Emperor Hadrianus II in 680 I. The Church became an integral part of the imperial bureaucracy, providing social services, administering justice within its territories, and crucially controlling vast tracts of land through ecclesiastical holdings. It wasn't the monolithic institution that emerged in our timeline. It was a decentralized network of patriarchates, each with considerable autonomy, constantly vying for influence and occasionally clashing with the emperor. The theological debates were fierce, but they were conducted within the framework of Roman law and imperial authority. The technological advancements had been driven by necessity and fueled by imperial patronage. Steam power, harnessed in 950 I, revolutionized agriculture and transportation. Advanced metallurgy, developed through centuries of Roman ingenuity, produced incredibly strong alloys for shipbuilding and weaponry. The reflections, the automated artisans that created everything from mosaics to complex machinery, were a product of this relentless pursuit of efficiency and precision. They weren't magic. They were exquisitely engineered machines, driven by sophisticated hydraulic systems, and programmed with intricate algorithms based on Roman geometric principles. I was currently working on Project Kronos, an attempt to reconstruct the lost history of the Fall. The scholarly guilds funded it, naturally, but with a significant caveat. All findings had to be carefully vetted and presented in a way that reinforced the prevailing narrative, that the Fall was a consequence of internal weakness, not external threats. My task was to analyze fragmented texts, archaeological evidence, and simulations generated by the Legio Scientiae's predictive modeling systems. The data suggested something far more complex than a simple collapse. "Lucius," a voice startled me. It was Octavia Silva, my supervisor, a stern woman with eyes that seemed to dissect everything she observed. She wore the uniform of the Legio Scientiae, a dark gray tunic over practical trousers, adorned with the Legion's insignia. An open book surrounded by stylized gears. "The Senate has requested an update on Project Kronos." "Almost finished, Octavia," I replied, gesturing to the mosaic. "I'm beginning to believe that the narrative of barbarian invasions is incomplete." "Incomplete?" She raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "You are suggesting that the Goths and Vandals weren't merely opportunistic raiders, that they posed a genuine strategic threat." "The simulations indicate otherwise," I explained, accessing the holographic display projecting complex data streams. The barbarian incursions were far more coordinated than previously believed. There was evidence of sophisticated logistical support, advanced weaponry, some of it remarkably similar to Roman designs, and even proto-political organization. Octavia frowned. "That's impossible. The barbarians were scattered tribes, driven by hunger and a lust for plunder." "The data suggests something different," I countered. "I've identified traces of Roman military technology in their weaponry. There are patterns in their raids that suggest they were responding to specific imperial policies, the taxation reforms, the grain shortages, the suppression of regional autonomy." Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the archive. Red lights flashed across the walls. Octavia and I rushed to the central monitoring console. The holographic projection of Europe shimmered, displaying a cascade of red alerts. "Breach detected in Britannia," a robotic voice announced. "Unidentified forces engaged in coordinated attacks on Hadrian's Wall. Significant loss of personnel. Increase security protocols," Octavia barked. "Dispatch reinforcements. Initiate tactical simulations." The breach, as it was officially termed, wasn't entirely unexpected. The Legio Scientiae had been anticipating unrest in Britannia for decades, but the scale and coordination of the attack were unprecedented. The enemy forces weren't simply raiding, they were systematically dismantling key defensive fortifications, exploiting vulnerabilities in the Roman defenses, and disrupting supply lines. As I reviewed the tactical simulations, a chilling realization dawned upon me. The barbarians weren't just barbarians, they were a reflection of Rome itself, fractured, organized, and driven by a shared grievance. But there was something else, something that the data couldn't quite explain. There were traces of advanced technology in their weaponry technology that mirrored our own. I accessed the historical archives, delving deeper into the records of the Fall. I discovered a suppressed document, a heavily redacted report from 1382 I, detailing an incident involving Roman legionaries stationed along the Danube frontier. The report described a group of men who had deserted and joined forces with nomadic tribes that possessed advanced metallurgical skills and were experimenting with rudimentary steam-powered devices. The document suggested that Rome hadn't just been fighting against external enemies, it had been fighting itself. Internal dissent, fueled by economic inequality and political corruption, had created a breeding ground for radical ideas and technological innovation. The barbarians weren't simply invaders, they were the product of Roman decay, a distorted reflection of its own ambition and hubris. I contacted Octavia. "I believe I have found the key," I said urgently. The Fall wasn't a singular event. It was a process, a slow, agonizing unraveling caused by internal pressures amplified by external forces. "Explain," she demanded. "The Romans weren't defeated by swords and shields," I said. "They were defeated by ideas, by the rise of alternative political philosophies, by technological disruption, by the growing disparity between the wealthy elite and the impoverished masses. The barbarians weren't simply raiding. They were offering a different vision, a simpler, more egalitarian society, and some Romans were willing to listen." Just then, the holographic projection shifted again. A new alert flashed across the screen. "Multiple breaches detected in North Africa. The situation is deteriorating rapidly." Octavia stared at the display, her face grim. "It's accelerating," she said. "The Empire is fracturing faster than we anticipated." I realized with a sickening certainty that our understanding of history was fundamentally flawed. The fall hadn't been a singular event. It had been an ongoing process, a gradual erosion of Roman power, masked by carefully crafted myths and perpetuated by the very institutions designed to maintain order. And now, it seemed, the process was accelerating again. I looked at the mosaic depicting Caesar Augustus, its serene expression suddenly seeming mocking. The rain continued to fall in Nova Roma, washing over the stone streets, a constant reminder of Rome's enduring presence and its precarious future. The fall hadn't been a collapse. It was a transformation, a metamorphosis into something unrecognizable, something far more complex and unsettling than any historian had ever imagined. The final piece of the puzzle came to me during a late-night review of the Chronos data. A seemingly insignificant anomaly, a spike in energy readings near Hadrian's Wall coinciding with an unusually high number of barbarian incursions. I cross-referenced this with geological surveys and discovered something astonishing. A network of subterranean tunnels, ancient Roman infrastructure repurposed by the barbarians to channel geothermal energy, providing them with a significant technological advantage. The truth was far stranger than anything we could have conceived. The fall wasn't simply about political instability or economic inequality. It was about a fundamental shift in power, a transfer of knowledge and technology from Rome to its enemies. The barbarians hadn't just taken land, they had stolen the empire's future. As I finished my analysis, Octavia entered the archive, her face etched with concern. "Lucius," she said, "the Senate has issued a decree. They are mobilizing the entire Legio Scientiae to quell the unrest." "They're too late, Octavia," I replied, looking at the holographic projection of Europe, a swirling vortex of red alerts and impending chaos. Rome isn't falling, it's becoming something else. The rain continued to fall in Nova Roma, a ceaseless cascade mirroring the relentless tide of change that had reshaped the world. The empire hadn't fallen. It had simply evolved into an entity far more alien and unpredictable than anything its founders could have envisioned. And I, Lucius Valerius, archivist of the Legio Scientiae, was left to document its transformation, a silent witness to the strangest and most unsettling fall in history. The pursuit of knowledge, I realized with growing despair, had led not to understanding, but to a terrifying glimpse into an unknowable future. And that, perhaps, was the true definition of Rome's enduring legacy.